All right, hello and welcome everyone to the San Anselmo Library's virtual Art Talk Tuesday, Contemporary California Artists. I'm Sariana, the Adult Services Librarian at the San Anselmo Library. And before we begin, I'd like to thank the Friends of the Library and the Library Parcel Tax for sponsoring this program and all library programs. Everyone will remain muted until the end of the presentation. If you have a question, please type it into the chat box or the Q&A box. I have both on, so we can use both. We will be recording this program and I will send the link out later today or early tomorrow. Technology can be very fickle, and I want to thank you all in advance for your patience and understanding during this program. Our speaker today is Avril Angevine. Avril is an arts lecturer with a particular interest in modern and contemporary art and California art. She has lectured on both subjects at various locations in the Bay Area, including the OLLI programs at Cal State East Bay and Dominican College. Avril has an MA in Comparative Literature from UC Berkeley and teaches English and Humanities at local colleges. She is also a museum guide at SF MoMA and a docent at ONCA. Please join me in welcoming Avril Angevine back to virtual Art Talk Tuesday. Woo! Yay! It's still weird doing it by myself, but that's fine. Take it away, Avril.
Thank you, Sariana. I love that. That's great. Okay, so welcome everybody. Let me bring my screen up here and start the slideshow. Yes, from beginning. There we go. Okay, welcome. I'm really happy to have you here today when it's so beautiful outside. You're indoors on Zoom, having a look at some contemporary California art. And by this, I'm really going to talk today about art produced in the last 40 or 50 years in California. So after the heyday of the Bay Area figurative movement of the 50s and 60s, and after the heyday of the Davis funk art artists of the 1970s, whose work you may know, you know this work because it's on the wall behind me, whose work you may know if you've attended my lectures on that era, or if you're just an active museum goer in the Bay Area, you know this work. So the art I'm going to talk about today ranges really widely, and we won't see the dominance of isms, right, or widely followed styles like Cubism, Expressionism, all those isms, Vorticism. We'll see similarities among artists, but more importantly, we'll see that this wide range of artistic expression reflects an underlying understanding of what art is. And this is what we call postmodernism. Postmodernism is an attitude more than a style. And as its name suggests, it reflects a reaction to a modern art. There we go. That is the art of the period sort of 1880 to 1940, art that we now consider serious museum art, like what we have of Matisse here. But of course, modern art itself was revolutionary, and most of it was rejected in its time, like this statement by a perceptive critic at the time about Femme au Chapeau. The modernists really did nothing less than challenge the traditional styles and the traditional roles of Western visual art up to that time, right? So Vermeer, gone. In the 20th century, artists were seeking a new language and a new function for art. And whether the art was interior, introspective, or socially engaged, modern art almost always foregrounds the particular qualities of paint and drawing and a respect for the artist's materials and skills. So what are those qualities and skills? Yeah, here's a nice picture: line, form, texture, color, and so forth. And the one thing that's not there is story. Narrative is not specific to art, so we tend not to see it so much in the modern period. Now, modern artists continue exploring until we get to abstract expressionism in the 50s. Jackson Pollock here, his Convergence from 1952. And many people feel that this is the end of modern art, and it's in the reaction to abstraction, that is the pop art, of the early 60s, that this is the first postmodernist art. And there's actually even a California connection to this, because Andy Warhol's soup cans were first exhibited at the Ferris Gallery in LA on La Cienega in, I think, 1962. So Andy Warhol really provides the pattern for postmodern art. That is a return to depicting the contemporary world commenting on it in a critical way while continuing the formal experimentation of the 20th century. So these coming up are some postmodern ideas about art. So anything can be the subject of art, including printed imagery that already exists. Any materials can be used in art, including dirt, water, food, and an idea can be art. Art need not be beautiful, if we can even define beauty. Skill in execution is not required, although much of it, probably most of it, does show a high degree of skill. This is the my 5-year-old could do that position. What more? The artist may be absent, but culture is always present, and it is art's role to challenge hierarchy. So with these ideas in mind, this is what's behind the art of the last 40, 50 years. And many of these ideas did already take shape in the art of the 60s and 70s, and are just existing in the 60s and 70s. So let's take a tour of a whole group of contemporary California artists. I'm sure you'll find some things that please you, that shock you, and probably some things you don't like. I hope not too many, but that's absolutely possible. And we're going to ease into postmodernism by looking at the familiar terrain of painting. And we'll start with a few younger artists who have returned to a style that was absolutely verboten in the pop years, and that's abstraction. So I want to introduce you to a MacArthur Award winner from South Central LA. His name is Mark Bradford, and there he is standing in front of a Clifford Still painting. So he likes abstraction. So Bradford was born in Watts in LA in 1961, and he creates abstract paintings from fragments of the urban environment, billboard paper, posters, newsprint, junk that he collects. As a teenager, he worked in his mother's hair salon, and his first works were actually made of the little permanent wave end papers that were freely available to him. He traveled around Europe for a decade, working in bars and restaurants, bumming around, and he entered Cal Arts at 30, which is a little bit late. And he's 6'8" tall. Important to know that. Now, his works show a new side to abstraction. Here's one of them, combining a juicy handworked surface with a kind of social awareness that we often don't see in abstraction. They seem to resemble aerial views, maps that show us patterns of class, race, and sexuality even that structure his own life in South Central. So what he does is, as I said, he collects posters off fences and so forth, local businesses, immigration services, DNA paternity testing, stuff like this. He's got big vats, he soaks them, he bleaches them, and then he uses them as materials to collage on his canvases. He builds them up, sands them down, builds them up again, and results in works that are richly layered, both in materials and in meaning. Here's another one. These are incredible. So what's happening incredibly is that the process is producing the artwork. He really has no fixed idea about what's going to happen when he sands things down and things start being revealed. So it's a really interesting collaboration between the artist and his materials. Here's another one. This one is called Scorched Earth from 2006. This, I think, is slightly unique. It either is unique or it isn't, Avril, English teacher. The red up at the top is paint. Most of his works don't have paint on them. And this one looks absolutely like an aerial map, a Google map of an area that has been burned out or blackened out. And it's really, Scorched Earth makes reference to the neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that was the site of a race massacre in 1921 that obliterated this area of sort of the Black Wall Street middle-class area of Tulsa. Here's a work of his, an earlier work from 2001 called Eve, that is made from these hair papers, these permanent wave papers. And it's actually wonderful. They have this light, interesting textures, translucent color, and they make a grid. It's actually a wonderful art material. Now, one of his largest works to date is called Pickett's Charge. Here it is. This is a huge composition, 8 abstract paintings 400 feet long each, that spans nearly 400 linear feet, sorry, that's at the Hirshhorn Museum in Washington. And there's a circular gallery and these go all around it. So this is called Pickett's Charge. Pickett's Charge was the final charge of the Battle of Gettysburg, which historians cite as a critical turning point of the Civil War and, of course, of American history. So what he has done here as his inspiration, he has worked with a combination of various colored papers and reproductions of the original cyclorama done by a French artist, Paul Philippoteau, which is on view at Gettysburg. So these cycloramas, circular, it was like the virtual reality of the 19th century, a painting that was in the round like that, so you could experience the whole thing. So that is kind of the underlayment of this. It's all over the place in there. And I think, go back and show you what it looks like close up. So he's got rope on there, and you can see that by tearing and scraping, layers are coming off. And I think the idea of revealing things that are underneath the surface, both materially and in terms of ideas, is what he's getting at here. It's a really, really rich and wonderful body of work that he has done. So I want to introduce you to another Southern California artist who also in some ways invests her abstract paintings with a touch of real life, but in a completely different way. Her large paintings involve spontaneously sponged paint on heavy linen canvas. And as she developed, she discovered different ways to include both the traces of both the natural and the man-made world. Whoops, there's Mark Bradford again, and there's that one. And so we're talking about Mary Weatherford, there she is. So in her paintings of the 90s and early 2000s, she incorporated with the paint elements, assemblage elements such as seashells, sponges, starfish even, within these washes of, it's called flash color. It's a kind of acrylic paint that she uses. There's another early work of hers called Vines. It's very close up. So these are images of the natural world. Okay, natural world, how much of it is purely natural? We are always making inroads on it. So in 2012, she was a visiting artist at Cal State Bakersfield, and she became intrigued by neon signs on old factories and restaurants, ones that are illuminated, ones that are burned out. And she started her Bakersfield project in 2012, the first series in which she incorporated neon rods into her paintings. The rods are screwed directly into the canvas and they're connected by thin wires, which you can see. And they create a kind of three-dimensional drawing on top of the background painting. And they lead down to magnetic transformers on the floor, which are part of the installation as well. And these neon tubes really read as lines on the surface. And sometimes they have, they're so bright that they create even after images looking at them. And here's one called Coney Island, which is neat. And this one is called Double Wave at Wind and Sea from 2015. That's apparently a beach near San Diego. This is really interesting. So this one from 2014 called From the Mountain to the Sea. It's from a series dealing with Los Angeles. And you know, Los Angeles, that's the interface between the urban and the natural world. Something you can really hardly avoid in California. I love this work. And myself being from Southern California and even thinking of the beach, I totally associate neon signs with the California shore. This big work you can see here looking at the bottom of it is at Claremont College in a dining hall. It's very cool. Now, earlier artists had used neon. A lot of the minimalist artists used neon for both its consumerist and its linguistic connotations, right? You could put words in it. But in Weatherford's work, it's an art medium. It's a form of drawing, which is kind of cool. Now, the third abstractionist I want to show you also connects the natural and the industrial world, yet in another different way. That's Leslie Shows. Here she is. She was born in Manteca, California in 1977, and she studied at the Art Institute in San Francisco and at CCA. But her childhood was actually spent somewhere else. And to give you a hint, she says her childhood was spent among glaciers, calcified mining ruins, and rainy rebar-strewn lots. Those were my playgrounds, she says. So where do you think she grew up? What does this make you think of? And in fact, the answer is Juneau, Alaska. So this is a work from 2012 that's really a combination of an incredible number of physical elements. It's ink, acrylic, aluminum leaf, plastic, plexiglass, ground glass, and engraving, and it's all on aluminum. Now, most landscape painting is about place or space, and hers is about that and time as well, kind of geologic time. These materially rich works she creates, which include things like salt and rust, which my information says she grows the rust herself, which is like, well, where else would you get, would you go buy rust somewhere? I don't know, but she creates rust, which she uses on the works. She will brush acrylic paint onto plexiglass and then peel it off in skins. And she uses images that she has found from magazines and of course on the web. So she uses a combination of broad gestures and really intricate details, creating a world in which we humans are hardly even present at all. This one does have rust on it and mud, and has gridded needlepoint patterns in there, which kind of end up looking like crystalline structures. And she even puts, that's a close-up of the bottom of it. Let's look back. Yeah, okay. Oh, there we go. Oh, this one, yeah. Here's a close-up of the bottom of that one. You can see the needlepoint paintings, needlepoint patterns in there. And she also, there's little faux metal, scrapbook labels. Those are in there too, making traces of the contemporary world even look like archaeological relics of our contemporary life. This is on a 7-foot square panel. Now, like Mary Weatherford, my fourth abstractionist for you is Eamon or Huron. He also works on raw linen with the brightly colored flash paint, but the results could not be more different. He is less concerned with formal questions than with cultural cross-fertilization between high and low, between folk and popular, between East and West. And he himself is such a cross-fertilization. His mother is of an Irish background, as you can see from his name, and his father is Peruvian. So he's got two traditions going on. And he creates these intricate, interesting, jaunty compositions of geometric elements like this, circles, triangles, diamonds, crescents, that, I mean, in some ways take us back to the early 20th century abstractionists like Kandinsky and even Mondrian. And they also, in some ways, hint at Latin American motifs. There's something going on in here that has to do with Peruvian cosmology, where the world is divided into, worlds are divided in two. There's a lot of dualism between hot and cold, positive and negative, dark and light, and so forth. And in both space and time, apparently, there are 3 different levels: the world above, the world here, the world below, time also, past time, present, future, which I think we can see reflected in this interesting work, which is huge, size of a garage door. And when you see it, it's odd because the background paint is gold, but it's matte on the linen, and that's unusual. Gold paint in paintings is usually very bright for that reason. And those circles up at the top with the half divided in half, those images perhaps are reminiscent in some ways of Incan nose ornaments, possibly he's referring to here. Here's another in this series. They're called an Infinite Regress series from 2017. So again, this matte surface, but a various combination of geometric elements, kind of interesting colors. And this is a big installation that he did in 2015 at the Hammer Museum in LA called Angelitos Negros. So it's fascinating. So looking at this, I think you would say you can recognize his work. And in fact, we've now seen 4 abstractionists, each with a definitive style that I'm sure you will recognize if you see it around in your museum travels. But it's not all about abstraction in the postmodern world. I want to look at some figurative works influenced probably by the pop masters of the 60s, like Andy Warhol and California's Ed Ruscha. And our next artist up continues this tradition as an honorary Californian, and he is David Hockney. This is an older picture of him. Now, Hockney, of course, is one of the most influential British artists of the 20th century, but he came to California in 1963. And since then, he's alternated living and working between Yorkshire, his home in the UK, and Los Angeles, CA. And of course, he made a big splash with paintings like this one, 1967's A Bigger Splash, that absolutely depict a California experience. You could hardly find anything more Californian than this done by a Brit. His work is wide-ranging and often probes the many ways we can see an image or a space. And he credits Pablo Picasso, Henri Matisse, and photography for influencing his distinctive and varied style. In November 2018, his 1972 painting, Portrait of an Artist, also known as Pool with Two Figures, sold for a record-breaking $90 million at Christie's, making it the most expensive painting by a living artist, at least at that time. It's been a couple of years, so I don't know what's gone on since then. So I think you can see in A Bigger Interior with Blue Garden and Terrace, this is from 2017, you can certainly see how he's influenced by Matisse in this wonderful way. And I love this picture of the Pacific Coast Highway, right? So he's totally into a California vibe here, and he's got the bright colors and everything. And I wanted to show you something I really like from earlier, from 1986. This is called Pear Blossom Highway. That's up in the Antelope Valley, right? The desert going out of LA. He created this work over a 9-day period in which he took hundreds of photographs out there and had them developed at an ordinary processing facility in nearby Palmdale. And then he collaged over 700 of them together. So like, remember you took your roll of film to Costco and they did doubles. It was like that. He just had them developed. And this 6 by 9 foot work is owned by the Getty Museum, whose director said of the way it combines both the driver's view and the passenger's view, it's more real than any view you can have standing out there in the desert. And he did this, he had a ladder, he got up on a ladder to take all these images, but it's absolutely sensational. And if you'd like to know what he's been doing recently, you probably know from this is his Yosemite series, his Yosemite Suite, which is done on an iPad. So there you go. You could do this too, because you have an iPad, right? They're absolutely wonderful. Now, another supremely figurative artist who also got her start in LA in the 1960s is the artist Via Selmans. So when I say that an artist, by that I mean that all artists love her work in the same way that kind of Joan Didion is a writer's writer, that writers really love what she does. She creates unbelievably subtle, delicate, monochromatic paintings, drawings, and prints based largely on her own photographs of the desert, the sea, the night sky, and other natural phenomena, such as this called Web Number 1 from 1999. This is charcoal on paper. So basically the lines you see there were drawn with an eraser. She's got this incredible touch. Now there's a sense of quietude and wonder in much of the work and a noticeable banishing of any direct human presence. So the artist is absent, same as with Leslie Shows in her geologic portraits. The artist is absent. Now Selman's family fled Latvia in 1940 when the Soviets invaded. And, bad choice, went to Germany. They survived the Nazi regime and finally ended up in the US when Via was 10. And she spoke no English at that point, and she gravitated towards art as a form of expression. And she ended up studying at UCLA. And here in the 60s, in the spirit of pop, she began drawing and crafting the objects that surrounded her, like TVs or her desk lamp here, pencils, erasers, the freeway, and so forth, and painted reproductions of photographs. And unlike most pop works, hers are monochrome and sometimes depict violence or conflict simply based on her own history, such as warplanes and handguns and so forth. And in the 70s, she began working on these highly detailed photorealistic drawings based on photographs of natural elements, such as the ocean or the moon's surface, the insides of shelves, a close-up of rocks. Ocean. Critics have noted, and you will notice, that there's no horizon, no depth of field, no landmarks, no edge to these works to put them into context. Basically, she went out the Santa Monica Pier and just took pictures of the water. And in an exhibition of her works, you'll have several of these that from a distance look exactly the same, but if you look at them closely, the wave patterns are different. They're absolutely staggering. The location of these things and scientific names of things she does are unknown. And she's also created sculptures of natural objects. Okay, check this out. These are bronze painted replicas of rocks. So in this image, you see two of everything, and one is the real rock and one is her reproduction of the rock. And I assure you, you can look at these for an hour and you can't tell which is which. The fidelity is absolutely extraordinary. I believe people have said that the reproduction is a teeny tiny bit smaller than the original, but I assure you, you can't see it. It's a staggering production. And nothing, in my view, that she's done is more astonishing than the pink pearl eraser that's about 2 feet long, made of wood, balsa wood, covered with, I don't know what, some kind of soft paint. It's incredible. So that's Via Selman's, an incredible artist. And our next artist is painter Robert Bechdel. His images are as precise as Selman's, but rather than providing us with no context, Bechdel gives us as much context as we can handle. So his search for an authentic style took him home to Alameda in the East Bay and the middle-class neighborhoods of his youth, with their family gatherings, their suburban bungalows, and cars. Lots and lots and lots of cars did he paint. More cars, more cars. Bechdel began working from photos in the 1960s as a way of avoiding the problems he saw in the local Bay Area figurative art style, which was dominated, of course, by Diebenkorn, Elmer Bischoff, Nate Oliveira, and so forth. He felt that they were kind of always looking over his shoulder, and he claims that he was not as good at the abstract expressionist gesture as the others were. But nevertheless, he credits Diebenkorn as a huge influence on him. And really, could this be any more different than a Diebenkorn image? Well, let's look at his painting, Diebenkorn's painting of the Ingleside, a neighborhood in San Francisco. And we can see that he too has chosen a totally innocuous sort of neighborhood, people not really doing very much. And also the spatial structure that Bechdel has appropriated here is similar to what we see in Diebenkorn. Now, here's a wonderful work of his, again, large garage door size, that's at SF MoMA, called Watsonville Olympia from 1977. Now, this is a staggeringly realistic work. You have to get very close to it to realize that it's not a photograph, it's a painting. But he says that painting, unlike photography, involves decisions all the time. And he says his works are about making marks, not recording a scene. So what he will do is take an uninteresting snapshot like this one of his sister-in-law in her backyard in Watsonville. And I think you can see that if you were taking this picture, you would have moved that ugly chair out and probably turned the camera the other orientation because she's quite tall. But he takes a photograph like this that's undistinguished and enlarges it with a projector It's a practice he learned from Warhol. It's a tool of graphic and commercial artists. He does an underdrawing, an undercoat of burnt umber, and then 2 coats of paint, and turns an undistinguished snapshot into a massive work of museum art. It's rather interesting. And just so you know, I mean, you can tell here how incredibly talented he is as a painter, but look at this. This is Arkansas Street at night. This is also done in charcoal and like total artistic chops here. I don't know how you do something like this. So you can work from photographs and not be a photorealist, as Bechdel is and as V. S. Selmans is. And we can see that in the work of our Northern California artist and teacher, Hung Lu, who died just this last summer. She was born in China in 1948 and was sent to the countryside as part of Mao's cultural re-education plan, where she worked in the fields for 4 years. She eventually did manage to study art, specifically social realist mural painting, in what was called the Revolutionary Entertainment Department of Beijing Teachers College. She immigrated to the US in 1984, where she became one of the first Chinese students to study in the US at UC San Diego. Another of the first wave Chinese students to study in the US was Ai Weiwei, but he went to New York and hung out with Andy Warhol. So Hung Lu's work, she mainly works from anonymous Chinese historical photographs, particularly of women, of children, of refugees, often of soldiers, which are used to structure her works, she copies from them. And possibly this is maybe came from her training in making murals, which are themselves usually based on photos. It's another work of hers called Loom from 1999. I love the birds, the large birds in there. And this is more recent, 2014. This is Imperial Garden, where we actually have an actual photograph in the work. So her paintings, which are often quite large, and they're drippy, washed with layers of linseed oil to make the paint run. These have been described as critiques of the rigid academicism of her training in social realist art, as well as sort of a metaphor for the loss of historical memory. I mean, photographs fade and they record memories that are gone, right? In fact, given the pathos that often infuses her works, her painting style has been described as weeping realism. So why would you work from a photo? And she says, I never copy, I interpret. When I go from photo to painting, I move from one language to another. Remember the movie Lost in Translation, she says? Well, a great deal happens as we translate one language into another. Photographs are fast. They capture a single second and stop time in a way. The person or the event stays frozen. When I translate a photo into paint, it's like a slow excavation. So throughout her career, she stayed with this method and with her subject matter of Chinese historical photographs until the last works she really did, when she went to the Oakland Museum and looked in the Dorothea Lange archive and did many paintings based on Dorothea Lange photographs. And I'm sure you recognize this one, right? She retired in 2014 from Mills College, where she had taught for decades. And I should mention that the inset there, the hand with the photo with the daisies, that is also a photograph of Dorothea Lange's that is on view at the Oakland Museum. And the story of it is that this is her son when he was a little boy, brought her a bunch of daisies for a Mother's Day present. And what does Dorothea Lange do? She took a picture of it. So that's there. So that's Hung Lu, another artist who reflects his community, but maybe with a bit more edge, is LA's Carlos Almiraz. There he is. Wow, colorful, colorful paintings. He was a Mexican-born artist known for his brightly colored murals and paintings, often focused on themes of city life, the plight of us humans in that circumstance, and his own LGBTQ and Chicano heritage. Now, he was among the first of many Chicano artists who helped catalyze the Chicano art movement in the 70s, beginning his career with political works for the UFW, for the Farm Workers Union. And although he saw himself as a cultural activist, he juggled many and sometimes contradictory identities over time. And over time, his art became perhaps less political and more personal, psychological, dreamlike, even mythic and mystical as he evolved artistically. And what I love in his work is the staggering juxtaposition of these candy pastel colors, David Hockney colors, if you like, and the urban blight that we see in his paintings of freeway crashes like this one, trash burning on the beach, this one, suburban nightmare, a tract home on fire. One of his most admired works is the 4-panel view of Echo Park that he did in 1982 that is rarely, if ever, seen all together like this. Here's a close-up of it. So in its scope and in its technique, it's reminiscent, right, of the water lilies of Monet. And again, it's interesting because certainly at the time, he himself lived right by Echo Park, but it was an area of gang violence. People would find guns in the undergrowth and gay hookups, all sorts of things going on there. And yet he's created this pastel wonderland from it. It was fabulous. He unfortunately died of age-related complications in 1989. But speaking of LA, a radically different style of LA art making can be found in the works of the cerebrally cool artist John Baldessari, a major and very tall, at 6'7", another very tall figure in the LA art scene, who influenced a generation from his position in the art department at Cal Arts in Valencia. He also just died this last year. He's considered a conceptual artist, for one thing, because of his use of appropriated imagery. He blends photography, painting, and text, and his work examines the very nature of artistic media while offering commentary on contemporary culture. And here's a work of his. He says, "I consider a word and an image of equal weight," which is unusual for a visual artist. And a lot of my work comes out of that kind of thinking, he says, such as how to feel miserable as an artist. Yes, set unachievable, overwhelming goals to be accomplished by tomorrow. Other works he did, his diverse practice does, as I said, include paintings, sculpture, and installations. And this is an early work of his, combining a photograph with text. And this one, Wrong. So those of you who are photographers, remember your very first lesson, which was do not position somebody so that a tree is growing out of his head. But is it wrong? Who says it's wrong? It's also a wonderful photograph. He's commenting on this technique and on this idea. He once said, you don't want anyone to say you can't do that, but you do, as he says, get a lot of that in New York. One of the healthiest things about California is why not? And the final image of his that I like is Karl Lagerfeld at the supermarket. Yay. Now, up north in San Francisco, the Mission School, which was a loose collective of artists resident in the Mission District in San Francisco in the 90s, they have a different vibe altogether, a folksy whimsy, a counterbalance to what they saw as the slick, intensely commercial art style of the 80s and 90s. When you think of Jeff Koons, people like that. And like the Bay Area figurative group, like the funk artists, the Mission School continued the potentially suicidal San Francisco artistic tradition of just flipping off the art market. They didn't really care. So first of these artists is Margaret Kilgallen. Her paintings and murals reflect a variety of influences, including hand-painted signs, elements of American folk art, mural painting, and so forth. And she often employs the warm colors of Mexican or Southwest painting. Many of her works were on found paper, like discarded bookend papers, that reflect an interest in typographic styles and symbology that perhaps can be traced to her work as a book conservator at the San Francisco Public Library in the 90s. There's a big work of hers. She was especially interested in the evidence of the maker's hand. So again, this is something a bit unusual in a postmodern artist. Most of them, the artist is not there. As she explained, I like things that are handmade, and I like to see people's hand in the world, anywhere in the world. And in my own work, I don't project or use anything mechanical most of the time, because even though I do spend a lot of time trying to perfect my line work in my hand will always be imperfect because I'm human. And I think that's the part of it that's interesting. From a distance, it might look straight, but when you get close up, you can always see the line waver. And I think that's where the beauty is. Now, Kilgallen unfortunately died in 2001 when she was only 33, 3 weeks after giving birth to her daughter. She died of cancer. And her husband, Barry McGee, here he is, graduated from the Art Institute in 1991 with a concentration in painting and printmaking, but he also rose out of the mission school art movement and graffiti boom in the Bay Area of the early 90s. His work draws, this is one of his monikers there, Twist, as a graffiti artist. His work draws heavily from a pessimistic view, we could say, of the urban experience, which he describes as overstimulation, frustration, addictions, and trying to maintain a level head under the constant bombardment of advertising. So his works, these are, I think, in the parking garage at LACMA. They often feature a central figure in front of abstracted backgrounds of drips, patterns, color fields. And he's even painted portraits of these street characters on empty liquor bottles that he's found, and flattened spray cans picked up at train yards, and painted wrecked vehicles even for art shows. One of his works that he is always slightly different whenever it's installed somewhere, and it's just a big collection of small, inexpensive picture frames with painted and appropriated imagery in it, and some just red. Red is a big color in his work. He's biracial, he's partially Chinese, and red, of course, is a big color in Chinatown and in Asian art. He is another version of it. And he apparently got the idea from this, for this traveling in South America and seeing ofrendas, or altars, where you see a lot of pictures placed together in this way. After 2001, when he was included in the Venice Biennale, the value of his art rose considerably, and most of his street art has been scavenged. This is the Moscone Garage in San Francisco that he did. You can see this from SF MoMA. So another San Francisco artist, totally different style once again, is Martin Wong. How different do you want? Painter of visionary realism, we could say, also closely connected to a neighborhood, but in this case, it's New York's East Village art scene of the 80s. So when he died in 1999, he was 53, and he'd lived in San Francisco, where he was born, since the mid-90s. So we consider him a California, San Francisco artist. His art was as culturally complex as his appearance here. This is a self-portrait, which was usually distinguished by his Fu Manchu mustache and a cowboy hat with his man Jesus with a crown of thorns there up above. His art was complex too, and it certainly lived up to his own complex background, which included a degree in ceramics from Humboldt State, a stint with the Coquettes, a gay performance troupe in San Francisco, and expertise in areas such as Asian painting and calligraphy, Chinatown gift shop souvenirs, and graffiti art. So some of his works is a work of his called Rapture, with a found frame, and in it, a painting of what he could see from his apartment window. Why not? And this is Chinese New Year's Day parade from 1992. And I like down at the very bottom, that's a little head looking into the painting, which I think is probably him as a young boy. There's a work called I Really Like. So once again, we have text and kind of a message mixed in here. I really like the way firemen smell when they get off work. It goes on from there. Starry Night, he was interested in the deaf community, and he learned sign language, which he's included in this work here. And you can see down at the bottom, the bricks, the neighborhood that he was living in New York, comes up a lot. He's got a couple of really interesting, sensational works. This is called The Annunciation from 1988. He was in New York. He was involved in the LGBTQ community. He got to know Mikey Pinheiro, who was a New Yorican poet who went to jail, became friends with him. And that's what we see here, one prisoner propositioning the other. And here we have Reckless, which to me is an absolutely stunning work of art. This incredible foreshortening that people have said recalls this work, this Lamentation by 15th century artist Andrea Mantegna. But to me, this makes me think also of Manet's Olympia in a way. Really interesting artist. And for our next one, we've got Enrique Chagoya, economist turned artist. Politics is the wellspring of his art. He moved from Mexico to the US in 1979, settled in Berkeley and began to study art, graduated from the Art Institute and earned an MFA at Berkeley. And from the start, his work offered abundant political comments, social satire, and cultural critique, and done with a humorous touch. This is When Paradise Arrived from 1988, which is at the De Rosa Preserve in Sonoma County. And I think you will recognize that hand with the glove on it as a Disney figure aiming to flick this young girl probably out of existence in some ways. Other of his works, this is at the De Young, called Fridas and Dieguitos. And the banner at the bottom says, "What appropriation has given to me," right? Cultural appropriation is a big theme of his. In 1992, he shifted to monotypes produced on a more intimate scale, inspired by pre-Columbian history and Aztec codices or scrolls, in which were recorded scenes of the religious and cultural life of Mexico before the conquest and after. They were done after too. His fictional codices, like this one called Organic Cannibal, include all sorts of iconography from Aztec civilization, colonial Christianity, 20th century American and European, there as we can see, pop culture. And they're all printed on handmade amate paper, which is what the Aztecs used. He gets it in Mexico. And of course, he knows Goya and transmits Goya. And of course, he knows Andy Warhol in The Enlightened Savage with these cannibal soups, cream of critic, collector's brain, and so forth. And his clash of sacred and profane sets the stage for abrupt juxtapositions, the humorous, the provocative, and so forth, and enlightening, which show his individual take on history from Cortez to the Border Patrol. It's an interesting work of his. And I really love this one. That he discovered, he did one of these DNA tests, ancestry tests, and discovered that his background was from all over the world. So he kind of depicted himself in all the various cultures that went to form a part of him. So is your head swimming at this point? Are you ready for a more challenging level? So I want to finish by looking at some object makers, which is perhaps a more accurate term than sculptor, although we'll see some artists who could best be described that way. As true postmodern hierarchy rejectors, many of our object makers combine drawing and painting with construction, making them a little bit challenging to place. This is Noah Purifoy, co-founder of the Watts Towers Art Center and the creator of the Noah Purifoy Outdoor Desert Art Museum, who spent the last 15 years of his life in Joshua Tree, California. He's best known for assemblage sculptures like this one, Sir Watts from 1966 at Oakland Museum, which was made from charred debris and wreckage. Here we go, collected after the Watts riots of August 1965. He earned his BFA from LA's Chouinard Institute right before his 40th birthday. Prior to that, he had been working as a social worker at the county hospital. And in the months after the Watts riots of 65, Purifoy and another artist organized this exhibition, 66 Signs of Neon, made of works from scavenged materials as a way to interpret the event. And for the next 20 years, he dedicated himself to the found object and to using art as a tool for social change. And in '89, he moved to a friend's trailer in the Mojave Desert and began constructing what is now the Noah Purifoy Outdoor Sculpture Museum on 10 acres of land near Joshua Tree, and you can go there. It contains over 100 works of art, including large-scale assemblages, environmental sculptures, and installation art created by the artists. Right? It's open to the public, and it's maintained by his foundation. And for Purifoy, the assemblage of junk shows the imposition of order on disorder and the creation of beauty from ugliness. And there we go. Mildred Howard of Berkeley explores race, gender, and public identity versus the private self in a variety of works, sometimes quite small, but I just want to focus on her big works, especially her glass and bottle houses, like this one. It's a communal pavilion of mirrored windows, which affords you no privacy whatsoever as a house. It's an exercise in seeing and being seen. And another approach can be taken at her work Memory Garden, which is at the De Rosa Preserve. It's a bottle house inspired by James Weldon Johnson's novel, Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man, where he talks about growing up in a home surrounded by bottles placed neck down into the dirt that reminded him of flowers. And this also comes from various African cultures, vessels for protection and safekeeping placed in front of the homes. At the Sacramento, as a close-up of it, what it looks like from inside. At the Sacramento airport is this work called This House Will Not Pass for Any Color But Its Own. Wonderful. It changes colors throughout the day, depending on the light. And this is called Frame and Reframe at Hunters Point at the San Francisco Shipyard. And this is a large work that's at the Richmond BART station. It's got a poem by Ishmael Reed on it. And I want to show you how you make this. You make it like this, like it's a huge, huge, huge project, make a work like this. Now, the next two artists could most reasonably be called sculptors, though when she began, Ruth Asawa's work was not considered art at all. It was considered a handicraft. She's a total materialist, that is, she's all about materials, and her material primarily is wires, crocheted wire. She was originally from Southern California. She and her family were interned in Arkansas during World War II. After she was released, she did a stint at Black Mountain College, an important incubator for American avant-garde and so forth. Rauschenberg, Cage, Cunningham, they were all there. And she studied with Joseph Albers. Here she learned to use commonplace materials, especially wire, which in the 50s, she was experimenting with techniques that she learned in Mexico for making baskets out of galvanized wire. And this is how you do something like that. It's very, very time consuming. And basically she has said they are line drawings made 3D. And she's also made wire sculptures in different ways like this, rooted in nature and geometry and abstraction. And I don't know if you know that this fountain at Ghirardelli Square was also by Ruth Asawa, and it's based on the image of a neighbor of hers who was breastfeeding at the time. Viola Frye is another American sculptor known for large-scale ceramic depictions of men and women. She grew up in Lodi, grew up making little cities out of wet sand and irrigation ditches, only to turn on the water, flood her creations, and build them again. That's an artist. Creating, breaking, and rebuilding remains central to her work. She started sculpting small clay figures until the late 80s, when she started making huge ones. The first couple fell over and shattered, so she came up with this idea of cutting them into multiple pieces, which you can see on the figure here, firing them separately and then putting them back together like a big jigsaw puzzle. And her glazing process here shows her ability to work with abstract color relationships, and shows that she's very close to the crazy Davis funk spirit here. And this close-up of the man shows how she uses color. I'm right almost at the end, and I got two more things to show you that are even bigger. I wanted to show you David Ireland, a latecomer to art who attended SFAI in his 40s, where he accepted the challenge of local conceptual art, as you can see here. His works have a certain quotient of absurdity in his methods, and he's known for a wide range of materials made from paint cans, phone books, metal, cement, wood, and even in one case, the skull of a water buffalo. This is Box of Angels. And in 2016, he had an exhibition at the Art Institute that included this reenactment of a work of his called Smithsonian Falls, Descending a Staircase, which is a cascade of concrete poured down the gallery's staircase so that you can't use the stairs, which he created originally in 1987. The poured concrete goes where it wants to go, as opposed to the concrete of the stairs, which are made in forms, kind of what he's talking about. He did break it up and leave a path through it up the stairs so that you could get up without using the ladder that he also provided. And also included in this exhibit was Angel Go Round and other rarely seen works of his. And as you may know, his entire house on Cap Street in San Francisco is an artwork that has recently opened as a museum. And it's so intense, the walls are so shiny that they apparently reflect the street scene below when they're near the windows. His maxim was, you can't make art by making art. And here's another view of his house with all the stuff going on in it. Now, so maybe you don't like the San Francisco Victorian vibe. Maybe you prefer LA and the mid-century modern thing. And if so, I got some real estate for you. In the Coachella Valley out by Palm Springs was a nice house created of mirrors by the artist Doug Aitken. There he is, known for installations of video, photography, sculpture, performance, a high level of production values, and working on a huge scale. He creates works that take the viewer unaware, like this one, the house that he did for Desert X in 2017. It's a mirrored ranch house that totally disappears in the surroundings, talking about placing the house in relationship, in conversation with its environment. There you go. Is that too much? He also installed this in the Alps later on, where all you can see is snow, but this to me is fantastic. I just love this work. It's not there anymore, sadly. Now I'm going to end with some art that you can see anytime. It's made for you with no admission fees and no opening hours. And those are murals. California is famous for murals. We got them in San Francisco on Balmy Alley off Mission Street. We got them in LA, all over the place, America's mural capital. We got them in Oakland, featuring two local heroes, Tom Hanks and the rapper Too Short. And you can even see murals in Walnut Creek on the boarded up Neiman Marcus store done in 2020. And we'll end with this one. We must all step up in our Jimmy Choos, available at Neiman Marcus. So there we go. This is the end of my presentation of works that are out and about that you can see these days in the Bay Area and beyond by a group of artists, San Francisco, California in general, just full of incredible artists with incredible ideas. So thank you. I see there's one thing in the chat there. Should I look at that, Zariana? Where is the Desert Mirror House? It was in the Coachella Valley. It was done for this thing called Desert X. It's not there anymore. It's packed up in a garage somewhere. I wish it were out. I would love to go see it. I missed it. I'd like to live in it too, I think.
All right, thank you so much, Avril, for this wonderful presentation. And if there's any more questions, feel free to put them into the chat box. We will have our next art talk will be on March 8th, and it will be the Goddess Images of Power from the Asian Art Museum. So if you're interested in that, I'll have the registration link available soon. There's another question for Avril in the chat box from
Sasha asked about the Alpine House. No, it's not up. As I said, I wish it were. I don't know how its plumbing is, but it just looks sensational. I don't know about its closet space, but it just looks sensational. Anyway, good.
Jane says, thank you for your great presentation.
Oh, well, thank you, Jane. And get out there and look around. Canyon, leave out. I can't include everybody. And Thibaut and Buffano, and those are earlier than the period I wanted to talk about today. But there are so many artists that you have to choose. So many artists, so little time. You have to talk so fast. Yeah, but no, I didn't include them. Is there a guide to the Bay Area? No. Okay, what a wonderful. Is there a guide to Bay Area murals? I saw that flash up, and I'm sure that there's a guide to, I know that down at Balmy Alley, they publish a guide and they have tours of the murals that are down there. I know that the city guides do tours of the Diego Rivera murals that are not next to each other. It's hard to see all of them at once. But other than that, no, I don't know if there's a guide to them. There should be. It would be nice. Yeah. Any more in there? Any more I can? I'm not familiar. Wonderful, what a huge range. Yeah, an incredible range, right? Thank you. The guys very yeah. Okay, yeah, yeah. I want the mirror house, but I can't have it. Anyway, well, if that's all, thank you all very much. Thank you, Sariana, as usual.
Nice to see you. I will stop the recording now.